couple days ago, I made a post to the Hearthstone subreddit asking the community for the goofiest ideas for expansions that could actually realistically work for the game. For example, my own suggestion was for a full pack expansion based around the Warcraft holiday of Brewfest, and to add a bunch of cards based around food, alcohol, cooking, and the various minigames from the WoW event. I wasn't sure what I would get in response. I was mostly expecting to get rained on by sarcasm and memes, and granted, the very first comment I got just said memes, but I actually did get some incredible concepts and a lot of creative and funny ideas for things that would fit perfectly with Hearthstone. So I just thought I'd go over a few of my favorite suggestions that I would absolutely love to see made into real expansions for the game at some point. First up is Azeroth Express from Koopa 2222, a classic train ride mystery scenario set in the Warcraft universe. This really caught my attention because train mysteries have a lot of possibilities, despite being such a simple concept. It also sounds like a really good challenge for the game's design team, as it would be incredibly tricky to get any kind of mystery-themed expansion to work in Hearthstone. How exactly would you make an adventure feel like a legitimate mystery case that makes you think and question where it's all going, rather than just a series of boss fights that are just themed around the tropes of a train mystery? I've tried wrapping my head around it, and I can't really think of any good solutions for that. However, we've already seen a minecart level and a chess match work in Hearthstone, so I wouldn't say it's impossible. Even if it does end up as a failed experiment, I still think it could be a net gain for the game overall. Then there's Inch Zero's suggestion of a dancing expansion with a focus on minion placement. We have a fair share of cards already that have effects that rely on placement, and it is something that you should be keeping in mind already, so an expansion with that as the core focus has a lot of potential. Plus, giving it a dancing aesthetic would be a really interesting bit of flair that we haven't seen in the game yet. Next up is the Power Ragers from Square of Healing, where you team up with a group of Super Sentai-inspired elemental ragers to take on Mechazod. I grew up with Power Rangers, so this idea obviously caught my attention, and it only grows on me more and more as I think about it. I think what I would want most out of the Power Ragers is for them to be the heroes of the textless minions that have been left forgotten by the meta. Considering how poorly the Ragers have always fared in Hearthstone, it would be kinda awesome to have an adventure focused on actually making them competitive. Dead Phoenix 77 suggests Planet of the Murlocs, an alternate reality expansion similar in tone to Whispers of the Old Gods. The only difference is that, instead of eldritch horrors reshaping Azeroth, it's the Murlocs. Just the thought of seeing a bunch of the legendary minions reimagined as Murlocs already makes this a very good idea. The one downside is that Murloc decks could become absurdly overpowered with that many Murloc cards in the game, but that's where the second half of the expansion comes in with various fishing tools that are super effective against Murlocs. Because, whenever you introduce a powerful new archetype, it's a good idea to include counters to it so it doesn't suddenly become the only archetype. Like what happened with mech decks, and Death Rattle decks, and Cthulhu decks, Secret Paladin decks, Grim Patron, 4 mana 7/7. Yeah. Okay, this next one I just had to bring up just because it is too bizarre to ignore. It's the Swellfire Peninsula from Jirachi Wishmaker. The idea is to have an expansion based on the Hellfire Peninsula area on Draenor, but reimagining everything after a 50s nuclear family like in Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best. I don't even know how you were even capable of thinking of that, but now all I want is to see Mannoroth doing a Don Knotts impression. Illidan's Outland Grand Prix comes to us via Kiyomatsu. Outland is already a fairly unexplored territory for Hearthstone and could be the basis for a full pack expansion on its own, but adding the Grand Prix angle also opens the door for cards based on the various mounts in WoW. We thought we might get mount cards with the Grand Tournament, but none of what we did get really played to the idea of mounts. Maybe a great race is just the thing we need to get this new archetype off the ground. Also, Dick Dastardly card. I want it! Now, this one is pretty awesome. MBTHVSK suggests an expansion themed around the Wild West, which is something we don't really have in the game right now. However, there is good reason for that, as Western is just about the only thing that hasn't been incorporated into Warcraft lore. We've got dinosaurs, giant mech suits, kung fu pandas, the entire Norse pantheon, and mummified cosmic radiation, but no cowboys. We've got the Taurens, who take a lot of clear inspiration from Native Americans, and also gunpowder is commonplace, but there's never been a Western-themed area. Then again, Hearthstone has never been 100% canon, and the devs could just make stuff up. But the craziest part of all this is that someone already did it. A user named Frostivus put together an entire Western-themed fan-made expansion with 300 new cards. I'll have a link to it in the description, and you should definitely check it out because it is nuts. Another personal favorite was Kobold Calamity from Puke Robot, an entire adventure based around kobolds and their precious candles. Seems like a silly idea at first, and there's certainly not enough there for a full pack expansion, but definitely enough for a good adventure. For one, the kobolds are buddies with the harpies and the magnetars, so we could have some cards and bosses based on them thrown into the mix. Secondly, Puke Robot suggests that the plot revolves around retrieving candles for the kobolds, so we could fit some bandit groups like the Defias Brotherhood into it, and have the ultimate goal be to retrieve a ritual candle that's being used to summon a dreadlord or something, and that ends up being the final boss. Finally, I have saved the best for last, and it is Yogg's Game Show Challenge from Cephilodactyl, a new adventure where the self-proclaimed god of death fully embraces its Clown Fiesta interpretation in Hearthstone and hosts its own game show where all the boss challenges are various game show-inspired minigames. I absolutely love this idea, as there's just so much you can do with it in terms of making memorable boss encounters. One idea I have is to make a boss be a trivia challenge where instead of either of you having cards, you have a weapon that never runs out, and the boss summons a few taunt minions every turn that represent answers to the trivia questions he asks you. Along with all the possibilities for bosses, there's also a lot of freedom for designing new cards. The Servants of Yogg-Saron are obvious options, but there can also be a bunch of cards based on the kinds of prizes you would win for completing an actual game show. Stuff like a refrigerator card for a new freezing option, or Mechgineer's Chopper and the Mechano Hog. I could go on all day with the possibilities, but I'll cut it off there. There are plenty of other great ideas for expansions that popped up that I just don't have time to cover, but a link to the original post will be in the description if you want to check it out and see all the crazy awesome concepts that people have. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.